Can I start by asking you what are your observations on one payment scheme which is truly universal? I mean the Alaska Permanent Fund.
Well, the fund itself, I think, is working great. It has been there for 35 years now. People have been receiving the dividend. The fund is financially sound. It could last for years. It's popular with the electorate, and it has done, even though it's very small, much smaller than I'd like to see in a basic income, it has done what basic income is supposed to do, is some part of it, which is to create a better world and less higher welfare and for the people who receive it. It has helped Alaska become one of the most equal of all states and one of the few where equality has been falling inequality has been falling, and while it's been rising in most of the rest of the country, not every time, but in some periods since they created it. The only unfortunate thing about the Alaskan project, well, aside from it not being large enough, is that there was never anything for it for the politicians. There was something for all the constituencies, but when the politicians look at it, they just see a lot of money they could use for something else. And so it has been under attack by politicians for some time.
But that's how politicians behave in any country.
Yes, but it is more tempting for politicians. This particular scheme is more tempting for politicians than most others, I believe, because this how can I explain this? This is a pile of money. This is over $50 billion just sitting there that makes $50 billion sitting there earning interest. And money is coming off of this every year in returns, is coming off of this every year. And that has been earmarked for the dividend. It's been earmarked for the dividend for 35 years. But politicians see that and they say, I want that money. I want to use it for something that will get me particular political gain. Some fund that is already working isn't going to do much for you politically. If it's a system that's already working, if you say, oh, I beefed up national health care or something, that can get you some political cachet. Or I cut national income, that can get you, I cut health care spending. Either way, it can get you with different constituencies. But with the money just sitting there, it's very tempting for politicians, because what one Alaskan politician said that I heard was that what a politician wants from money is to reward their friends and inflict their enemies. That's what they want money for. And politicians can't use this fund either to promote their friends or to attack their enemies. So it is something that is very tempting for politicians, more than other policies are. And so just in the past year or so, the governor, even going over the heads of the legislature, exactly how he worked this is hard to understand, but the governor has redirected some of the money from the returns to the Alaska Permanent Fund away from the Permanent Fund dividend and into general government spending. And so he wasn't able to kill it.
And then his ratings went down.
His ratings went down, but so far his effort has not been overturned. So he might have gotten away with it. We'll see. Now, that is, of course, very bad after all these years. And you wonder, would it have been better if when they started it, they put more money in the permanent fund and they had some of the returns to the permanent fund going to dividend and some going to the general budget in a fixed proportion, so that the politicians would see something in it as well. I'm very worried that with the financial situation in Alaska as oil prices go down and the amount that they're drilling decreases, that they will raid this entire fund and all of that $50 billion will be gone and Alaska will have nothing to show for it.
Alaskan fund aside, if we're looking at all other tests and experiments, what can be considered the most complete approach so far?
Well, there was briefly something in Iran, but that was so short-lived that it's not worth talking about. There have been 5 pilot projects in the United States and Canada, 4 in the U.S. and 1 in Canada in the 1960s and 70s. Those were very extensive experiments and have yet to be replicated, although now several countries are trying it. Finland has begun one. Canada has announced that they are going to begin one very soon, and other countries are talking about it. Now, the other countries are not certain. It might happen in Scotland. They've been talking about it in the Netherlands, but probably they're going to go very far from the basic income model in the Netherlands. And a few other countries. Now, and private companies have been, or private nonprofits have been doing this in a couple of places. There's a small scale one in the United States called Y Combinator that's doing a basic income project in the United States, but unfortunately it's going to be at a rather small scale. There's a charity called Give Directly, which has been it's called Give Directly because they give cash, which already makes it close to the basic income model, is they don't try to be paternalistic. There's other charities where they give people cows in Africa, like they think people don't know what to buy with their cash, and they think people sitting at home in desks in America or Europe know what poor people in Africa need more than they do. So, we'll give you a cow, but we won't give you cash because we don't think you know what's good for you. But Give Directly has been giving out cash as a development project, and they have been very big on evidence-based research, and they've compared the impact of what they do to the impact of what a lot of other programs do, and found they've had much better success because the people who do it, the people who are living those lives, know what they need more than people in charities back in the United States. And now Give Directly has really moved to the basic income model, and because in Kenya everything is really cheap, they're probably going to have a basic income, a very small basic income by our standards, but a big impact on people in the region. They are going to have a basic income that's going to affect 10 or 20,000 people, if I have my figures right, and that will make it the largest project ever. The largest one so far was one in Seattle and Denver in the United States back in the 1970s, which had about 5,000 people. So this is going to be 2 to 4 times the size of that one, maybe larger if they can raise enough money.
People who hear about universal basic income for the first time, they always ask, who's going to pay for this? Can a society afford this?
Oh, of course. It's not even really that expensive. It is just a simple of an idea that everybody is going to have enough money that they can eat and sleep in a safe place and have decent clothing to wear and a little more money to make sure their basic needs are met. And most of the money, you're giving it to everybody, which makes it sound expensive, but you're also taxing everybody. And some people are going to pay more in taxes than they receive in basic income. And some people are going to receive more in basic income than they receive in taxes. But the expense of giving it to one person and then taxing it right back, that's not really expense. If the government gives $1 to you and then raises your taxes by $1 or a ruble or whatever currency we're talking about, that doesn't cost you anything. When you look at the net cost of basic income, which is the redistributive effect, how much goes from the net contributors to how much goes to the recipients, it is it is actually a very affordable program. I've just been doing some calculations in a paper that will hopefully be coming out soon called The Cost of Basic Income, Back of the Envelope Calculations. I found that in the United States in 2015, a basic income large enough to eliminate poverty would cost, including administrative costs, would cost $539 billion a year. That's about 25% of what the government is already spending. The U.S. government is already spending on entitlements right now. And it's less than 15% of the federal budget. And it's less than 3% of gross domestic product. So for 3% of gross domestic product, the United States could eliminate poverty without changing anything, without cutting any other programs. And maybe if we don't need some of the other programs, once poverty is eliminated, we can eliminate some of those and save on some of those other transfers. So the actual cost is going to be even less than $539 billion a year. So yes, it's an extremely affordable program.
It's often said that modern social systems are full of confusion, full of duplication, and if there would be one single payment which replaced various often overlapping ones, it would save a lot of money. Is this kind of argument the best argument for the basic income?
That's one argument, but I don't think that's the most important argument. I think that's a good argument, and there's a lot of merit to it. There are some things that you can't cancel. Not all of our transfer payments are designed to eliminate poverty and make sure everybody has enough to live on. Others are to reward people who have retired, so they have a little more than everybody else. You can't cancel that. There are others that are targeted to people who are disabled. If you have a basic income, you wouldn't say, oh, people who are paraplegic should buy their own wheelchairs. No, we should providing them wheelchairs. So there are a bunch of things that you can't cancel, but there are some things that you could. There are things that are specifically targeted to. We have a program in the United States called food stamps, which gives special money that poor people can only spend on food and only gives it to poor people. Because they don't think poor people know enough to buy food, which is kind of silly. Everyone buys food. And that one is much, much less than basic income. Something like that you could cancel, but there's other things that you can't cancel. So it could streamline the welfare state, but it couldn't really eliminate everything else. Now, however, that's not the most important argument for basic income. The most important argument to me for basic income that I think it's simply wrong for one person or one group to come between another person and the resources they need to survive. And we should not kid ourselves that is what we're doing in the economy today. Is that the government has come along and said, oh, the resources of the earth don't belong to the people, they belong to this small group of property owners. And you can't access the resources of the earth unless you take a job for the property owners. And you can't just work for yourself. We will not allow you to use any resources to work for yourself. Work means subordination. And when Russia was the Soviet Union, they didn't change that. They instead of the property owners being wealthy people, the property owners was the Communist Party. But it really didn't make any difference compared to the capitalist owning class or the Communist Party controlling class. Individuals had no other choice but to work for someone else, could not work for themselves, even though our ancestors were once free to work for themselves, starting a farm, starting their own business, hunting, gathering, fishing, all those things that you would be free to do if you had access to your own resource, including starting your own business. We are not free to do because everyone else owns things. So a market economy, the idea of a basic income is a market economy where you have direct accesses to the resources you need to survive and the things you can do and all the things you can do with those things.
But isn't this the moral of the centuries that you have to work, with some exceptions, if you're old or if you're sick, otherwise you don't get any social support?
Well, the that model where you don't get redistribution unless you meet all these conditions, that has been the model for our redistributed system going back to Bismarck, when basically the Germans invented the welfare state in the 1870s or 1880s, and that model has been popular. But that model is has not worked for people. That model is based on this idea that prosperous people have the right and responsibility to tell poor people what to do. The prosperous people take the resources, and the poor people can't ask them until they prove that they're truly needy. But what do they have to do to prove that they're truly needy? They have to work for the more prosperous people. And that's rather self-serving. It's not all paternalistic, but it's also very self-serving. And so I'm always suspicious of paternalism to begin with. When it's paternalism that has a clearly self-serving motive, then I'm very skeptical. But what we need to realize here is also that doing this has not been good for the working class. We think, oh, I'm a middle-class worker. I don't want any taxes of mine going to those lower people. I'm prosperous. Those less prosperous people should do what they're told, the way I did what I told. But by thinking that the more prosperous can put the less prosperous in a position where they have to do what they're told, is actually, we have put the vast majority of humanity in the position where we all have to do what the wealthiest few among us do. Most people I know, middle class, prosperous people, they can't just work for themselves. It would take them years to start up enough money to start their own business, much less to say start a farm or their own venture that wasn't ultimately serving someone else who has property. We are all in this position, and we are all disadvantaged by it, except for those very few among us who are independently wealthy and never have to work another day in their life. We all have to work for them instead of for ourselves, and we have harmed ourselves. Since we've been cutting the welfare state, since the trend of cutting the welfare state began in the 1970s, the typical workers in most industrialized countries haven't had a raise in real terms. All of that automation we've had in the last 40, 50 years, all of that increase in gross domestic product, all of that economic growth that we've had, almost all of that has gone to the wealthiest 1% or maybe 2% in some countries. And the rest of us has stagnated because we are not free to say no. We don't have to have the power to say no to the jobs that we have. And when you put the vast majority of humanity in the position where we have no power to say no to jobs that are unattractive, you create an incentive problem. We have a horrible incentive problem in the world today where employers don't have incentive to pay good wages. They don't have incentive to share economic growth with the rest of us because the market wages are low, because we're all under condition where we have to. We're in a state where we have to take these jobs. So we have actually harmed ourselves by putting ourselves in this position. We, the middle class, who sometimes vote for these programs of saying, oh, we don't give anything to the poor unless they prove they're worthy, are actually harming ourselves. And I think more and more people around the world are figuring this out, that inequality has been a growing problem for 45 years. And that's why there's a movement now for basic income, and that's why there's a movement that we have things like the Occupy movement, the 99% movement, and Arab Spring, and all sorts of other movements of people who are concerned about inequality. And we're opening up to this idea that we need a new approach, something that's really going to create a society that shares its wealth with everyone.
Okay, can we go back to the experiment in Finland? I wanted to ask you about the size. So the size of the basic income should be what it is in Finland right now. Roughly the amount of unemployment benefit, something which just gets you covered for basics.
Well, a lot of people in Finland, a lot of basic income supporters in Finland were very disappointed that the level was too low. I'd much rather see a higher basic income, but I'll start at any level. I mean,
How would you compare this to the payments in Alaska?
the Alaskan Permanent Fund is much lower than this experiment that they're having, but the Alaskan Permanent Fund dividend is a good start. And this experiment is testing something that's a move in the right direction. I would like to see more, but it's a great direction. But also, the amount that they've chosen is very good for an experiment because it's the same amount as what people on their equivalent of unemployment insurance are making right now. And so you can say, okay, here are two equivalent sized programs, and we want to compare them to see how people react to both programs. And so for testing, I think they chose the right amount. For actually implementing the program, I would like to have something higher. Because what if you test a program, a basic income that's twice as high as unemployment insurance, and then you look, people behave differently with this basic income than they do with this unemployment insurance, but you find you got to ask yourself, well, are they behaving differently because it's a basic income? Are they behaving different because it's larger? And we want to know that difference. For science, you want to know, are the differences in behavior attributable to the size of the program or the type of the program? And I think the Finns are very aware of that issue, and that's one of the reasons they've chosen this level.
And if by the end of experiment in Finland it turns out that the majority chose not to go and find jobs, would that mean that the experiment has been a failure?
I certainly hope not. I think we've got to realize, when people don't work, when there's anyone somebody who could be a worker who doesn't, we always want to say, oh, lazy workers, these are bad people. Nobody ever says cheap employers, that the wages are too low. Isn't that funny? Because every time somebody looks at the jobs available and says, I don't want to take one, what they're saying is the wages and the working conditions and the fringe benefits of this job are not good enough to make it worthwhile for me to take it. It's a two-way street. The same we do when if I go to look for a car. When I go to look for a car, if I go shopping for a car and I say, I don't want the car at this price, and I wanted maybe I'd buy it at this other price, and the car dealer says, I don't want to sell it to you at that price. Nobody says I'm a bad person because I didn't buy the car, or he's a bad person because he didn't sell the car. Only in the labor market are we so judgmental. And we're always judgmental on one side, in favor of people higher up in the hierarchy and against the most disadvantaged people in the country and people who are working in jobs that haven't had a raise in 40 years. We want to judge them because maybe we sympathize with people higher up and we don't understand what it is. I don't know why we judge them, but it is wrong to do that. I think we need to look at things in a different way. Is that if you want someone to work for you, you need to approach them as a free person and say, okay, I can't starve you to death. I can't take all the resources away. I can't take all the resources away so you can't use them. And then effectively force you to work by putting you in that position. I've got to start out with you. Have a basic income, a basic level, so you're not going to starve. You're not going to starve. You're not going to be out on the street. You're not going to be You're not going to have no clothes to wear. You're in a free position, but I'm going to give you a wage that makes you want to do it on top of that, so you can buy luxuries. That's your responsibility as an employer. That if you want someone to work. So if they give a basic income and people don't work, then I think we should look at these employers should be paying more money. And if employers don't want to pay more money, that's fine.
And here we come to the position of the Finnish trade unions, who consider UBI a bad idea because they think that people will not work and they will not fight for their labor rights.
Oh, I think that is, simply a strategic error on the part of the trade unions, is that basic income empowers workers to fight for these things because it, as Eric Olin Wright, the famous sociologist, calls it, it is an inexhaustible strike fund. So you have your trade union, you go on strike, what breaks the strike? What makes it so the strike has that so often unions have to give in and eventually accept what the employers take. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, and they lose a lot, especially in my country. And that is because they run out of money and they have to go back to work. If you have your basic income, then your basic needs are met, and you can use this as a strike fund. It will empower workers, and we don't know how much better wages and working conditions are going to get if we have a basic income. We have to have one on a national level to really find out how that's going to work out.
On your website, you publish these two lists of preconceptions, both in favor and against basic income. Does this mean that nothing is certain at this stage?
Oh no! Those claims. My idea in that article was simply to list claims that people are making on both sides, but without any evaluation of which are good argument, which are well-supported claims, and which are contrary to evidence claims. But I just wanted to list them to get them out there. Now, some of the experiments can tell us a few things about those, and those will be helpful. But I think a lot of those, there's really good evidence available already. We know that basic income can eliminate poverty. And from other evidence, we're pretty sure that a basic income that can eliminate poverty is financially sustainable. As I've said, it's not even that expensive. And we know that when you eliminate poverty, people are happier and healthier, and kids do better than school, and you have lower infant mortality, and you have fewer low birth weight babies. You have so many good reasons to eliminate poverty. I think the argument for eliminating poverty is overwhelming. It is disgraceful in the world today, which is wealthy as this world is, that any person and any country is forced by their government to live in poverty. And do not forget that if you live in poverty, it's because you're forced to.
Would you bet on UBI being introduced in any country, say, within the next 5 or 10 years?
I am someone who is definitely shies away from predicting the future. I'm a believer that the future is inherently unpredictable, and the people who go around saying, "Oh, this is going to happen, that is going to happen," don't really know what they're talking about. They get lucky sometimes, but they don't really know. There are promising signs, but I can't say it's going to happen. The promising signs are that people are fed up with growing inequality, and they're taking action against it. And the people who are fed up with growing inequality are not looking to rebuild the welfare state just as it was 50 years ago. Because the idea of that welfare state, the conditional welfare state, was, well, if everybody proves they're worthy by working, then we will make sure that everybody has enough to live on. And most societies, maybe to some extent the Nordic countries did this, but most societies never lived up to that. They asked the poor to prove it and prove it and prove it again. And still, in my country, usually 10 to 15% of people in every year are living in poverty. Now, that's lower than it was before they created the welfare system. It's less than half of what it was. But still, they prove they're worthy, and they still do. And then it hasn't protected the welfare system from getting attacked. They've been cutting it and cutting it and cutting it. Whoever qualifies for a program, the enemies of that redistribution vilify them. So people are upset about, and because of this, we're getting more unequal. And people are upset about this, and people are looking for a new model. I think that is promising for the future. And people are talking about it all over the world. There are a lot of developing countries. I didn't even mention the experiment in India that went on a few years ago. There's probably going to be a new one in India. They're talking about it in Namibia, in Brazil, and in the Nordic countries that already have advanced welfare states, and places like the United States and Canada and England, where the existing welfare state has been cut a lot. They're talking about it there. And even in the Far East, China and Taiwan are both talking about it. So I think there's a lot of hope, but I can't predict where or whether it's going to happen. But I do think there's reason to believe that people are going to look for an alternative to the current welfare approach that's not as stingy as the current welfare approach. And I think basic income is one of the prime things to look for.